Good, good, good. Well, our next speaker is no stranger to these events. He's on the stage already. I've not introduced you yet, but I will do now. He's no stranger to these events. He's a passionate and practical campaigner with a reputation for inspiring individuals and organisations to work together for the common good. I suspect if you cut him in half, and I'm not advocating this, but you'd find the words public transport stamped through him like a stick of Blackpool rock, and indeed, he was once in charge of the transport system in Blackpool. He received an OBE for his services to public transport, and he's policy advisor to Album. He is, of course, Tony Depledge.
Thanks, David, and thanks for reading all the words I gave you. Absolutely perfect, because yesterday, of course, Ben had a go at me saying there's going to be great speakers and Tony Depledge. But I realised, of course, and he put me on after Sarah Boyd, which is a real challenge, because Sarah and the management team and the company at Lothian are deeply impressive. So it's actually a bit of a challenge to follow everything that Sarah was saying. I'm going to talk a little bit about transport policy. Don't switch off completely. It's not as dull and boring as you might think, at least I hope it isn't. But it is important for us because actually, as Alison Edwards said yesterday, the next 6 months are going to be really very important for our industry across the UK as we go into a general election and politicians start to make statements about what they're going to do after that election. So I'm going to give you a short overview of a couple of things that we're doing in Album, and actually also to say that, Album doesn't have a large resource. Our objective is to help members understand the issues and help members also have the talking points, the tools they need to be able to speak with confidence to politicians and intending politicians back in your own areas. So I'm going to have a look at a couple of things in the policy landscape. There are lots of things for Album members to think about, and of course one of the challenges for the SME sector is that you are likely to be concentrating on the operational things that affect you every day, but sometimes you do need to raise your eyes over the horizon and worry about the things that are just over there that might be about to come round and bite you. And we'll talk about a couple of those points as I go on. I do, however, know that rule one in any series of presentations about buses is that you have to show some pictures of old buses, so I'll do that in a minute. But before I do that, I would also suggest that I hope you've had a chance to have a look at Passenger Transport's notes about the Album Conference and the Album Report 2024. There's an excellent article in there by lots of people, actually. Sadly, there's also one by me. And in there, you'll find me quoting from a transport conference that was held in Manchester in 1938. I should explain to Ben, by the way, I wasn't there. It's something he accuses me of. But it's very interesting that in 1938, the general manager of Manchester Corporation Transport was saying, we have to get roads back to doing what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to be free to move traffic. It's not all about parking. And we need to have priorities for public transport services over other forms of transport. 1938. It's actually in this rather grand. These are the proceedings of that conference about transport in Lancashire. There were 350 delegates went to that conference. It's absolutely fascinating to see the sorts of things that were discussed. And part of the argument I give you here about that is we have to keep making the case over and over again. We get new politicians coming along, we always have to make the case again. And when we talk about politicians not having the political will to make the changes that we need in our industry, that's usually because we haven't won the argument with the electorate. And that means we actually have to give them the ammunition they need to be able to win those arguments. So, pictures of buses, just in case you thought there weren't going to be any. By the way, the chap in the middle on the left-hand side is me as a tram driver in 1969, in the year which when I began working. And those of you who know the old tram systems in Blackpool will know if you had a double-deck tram, you had two conductors. So those are the two conductors on either side of me as we sit there in our well-protected meal break environment, i.e. a rock at the Pleasure Beach Turning Circle, where we could spend our half an hour drinking the tea we'd made in our brew can, and often eating the fish and chips that we'd put onto the resistance box in the tram so that we'd keep warm whilst we were going to get our break. The picture in the middle at the top is Midland Road, where I was a driver for quite a few years. This is when I was a conductor to this absolutely lovely guy from Malta, who was the driver standing in front of the D9 there. I put this there because this is to indicate that not everything in the old days was absolutely perfect. Midland Red had some runnings on the 82 service between Bearwood and Birmingham, which was largely run by West Midlands PTE. Mostly Midland Red just forgot to run the trips that they were supposed to run, until people like me said, "Are we running 82s anymore?" And then they said, "Oh yeah, sorry about that, we missed them." On the right at the top is my bus parked in Dudley. Look at the high quality infrastructure that we were able to provide in those days. A concrete shelter, concrete because all the windows have been removed, and people standing around waiting for it. So it was a happy time. The bottom left is the days just before the depot I was working in was taken over by West Midlands PTE. If you look carefully, you can see that it says on hire to Midland Red because the legal ownership has been changed on the side of the bus. And on the right-hand side, I found this quite an interesting picture because I'm not sure whether this is something that we see much of these days. I moved, when I stopped being a driver on the day that West Midlands PTE took over my depot, I went to work in the traffic office in Worcester and then moved to the traffic office in Leicester. And we extended a service in Leicester to a new housing estate, Beaumont Leys. And we got the buses in before the roads were finished. I'm not sure that that's something you can easily do these days, but it did mean we got the buses in before people were living on the estate. Rather than the way you find it these days is that people move into the estate before the roads are finished, and then you put the bus on, but by that time they've already worked out they need a car. So this was quite an interesting little snippet. The person standing at the bus stop is a good friend to the industry, Chris Cheek. And sorry he isn't here today, but I know that he takes a great interest in everything that Album does. That's enough of all that. Let's move on. So, general election, we're going to have quite a few important issues for bus operators, as we discussed yesterday with Alison. Franchising is going to be one of the key things that comes up if we have a Labour government. Now, Album does not have a position which is pro or anti-franchising. We will work within whatever regulatory regime we are given. Clearly, it is not our job to try and subvert democracy. People vote for the politicians they want. The politicians then make the difficult choices that they're expected to make. We are, however, very keen to remind everybody, particularly an incoming Labour government, of the importance of the small and medium-sized enterprises, the SME sector, because we clearly see that Album members are local businesses with local knowledge, and they are committed to their local area. And we believe very strongly that there is a role, and should be a role, for SMEs in franchised arrangements. We have to work out how best to do that, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. The Labour Party has also talked about the opportunities for local authorities to have local authority operating companies again, and there are only 8, I think, at the moment, out of the many that there were in 1985. Clearly, all the local authority companies are members of Album. We have knowledge and experience that we can offer to local authorities if they were interested in starting up their own business. It's not an easy gig. You have to get the governance right, you have to get the financing right, you have to understand what the local authority wants out of the bus company. In my days in Blackpool, if I said to the local authority, what are your priorities for us as a local authority bus company? They would say, lowest fares, highest frequencies, highest wages, newest buses, biggest dividend. Yeah, right, okay. So which of those is top? And the answer is, well, it depends when you ask us. You know, if you've just put the fares up, we want the fares to be lower. If you've just had a row about wages, we want the wages to be higher. If we're just doing our annual accounts, we need the dividend to be as high as possible. So the answer is, you can't put priorities. All you can say is that the business will optimise the balance between all those things. And it's a really key thing for local authorities to understand if they're going to go down the route of having a local authority bus company. There's nothing wrong with having local authority companies. They're great businesses. They have benign shareholders. They can work together with their local communities, and that's absolutely fine. But we would want to be able to help, because we also want to ensure there's a level playing field between SMEs in the private sector, local authority companies as well. And I think we have something we can offer. Also, the Labour Party has talked about safeguarding, nothing to do with safeguard, by the way, safeguarding local networks. We're not absolutely certain yet, and I'm not sure the Labour Party is absolutely certain yet what they mean by that, but we will certainly work with them to understand that a little bit better. And I have to say, it would be a shared aspiration. I think we also want to safeguard networks and safeguard our businesses the best way that we can. So are we up for a new operating model of some sort? Martin Dean this morning, who also had a go at me, but well, I'll let that pass for the moment. Martin Dean this morning talked about how we were in a new phase in the operating world, and I think I understand that. We think, however, that dialogue is the key thing, the key importance. We would like to have a settled policy framework. We want a long-term financial settled policy framework within which we can plan and build our investment, our training, our future businesses. That's really quite an important issue. And we do need sustainable and fundable local plans, by which I mean, if local authorities are going to take a particular initiative, whether that's franchising or other, we need to know that those are long-term schemes that are going to survive and not be something that's this year but not next year. We need long-term commitments, the sort of thing, as Alison said yesterday, that you get in the railways. We need that sort of approach, I think, to financing in the bus industry as well. The Labour Party has said, excuse me, the Labour Party has said that there will be no need for more government money to do the franchising that they're going to offer to local authorities around the country. I think that's code for you're on your own, which is if you can find the money, that's fine. Don't come and ask us for it. We'll give you the powers, but we won't give you the money. And that's actually going to be a really key decision for many local authorities to make when they, if and when they get those additional powers. So franchising then, anyone? It's a shame that we never actually push back on this word. Franchising sounds nice and cuddly, but actually, of course, it's a competitive tendering regime. And it's quite clear it's a competitive tendering regime. I know that many SMEs see this as a risk. I know that some see it as potentially an existential threat. I know also that if you are an SME, you can't move anywhere else. You can't just simply, as Alison said yesterday, you can't trade wins in one part of the country against losses in another part of the country, because on that basis it can become an existential threat. So part of our role is to try and work out how do we ensure that when local authorities take over the revenue and cost risk that's essential as part of the franchising process, that they do actually have an eye on what SMEs can bring to the party. Martin Dean talked about, one of his items was about authenticity. Interesting word. But actually, I think that's where the SME sector is the strongest. We do have that authenticity. We do know our local communities. We live and work in the communities that we serve. And I think that's a really important selling point for the way that SMEs can act. But what's going to happen outside franchising areas? Bearing in mind that if we ask the question, do local authorities everywhere across the country have the skills and resources to be able to design networks and to have contract arrangements and to let tenders and manage those tenders? To which the answer is broadly not. It's a very patchy picture. Some local authorities have some extraordinarily good people who do know how public transport works and how buses work and what the value of buses is. Some don't. And that's not an easy thing to solve, and it's not going to be quickly solved. And I have to say that one of the things I'm particularly keen that we establish, giving local authorities the opportunities to decide on a franchising model if they wish. Fine. Please don't let them hold that over operators for the rest of time. You're not going to be in a position to invest in your business and have a future for your business if in 6 months' time your local authority says, you know what, we're going for franchising. We can't be in a position that it's constantly available as something that might come up as almost as a threat. I'm not suggesting it's a blackmail threat, but almost as a threat. We need to have something which says, this is the regime within which we work for at least a reasonable period ahead. And actually, I think that's something that's not been thought through. Bill Harron and I are being encouraged to speak to the Labour Party's business section because they are very wedded to the SME sector. So we need to talk about what is it that would be a risk outside franchise areas that don't decide to go that route, just in case something happens later on down the line. We'll be picking that point up very strongly as well. And then the other group I should mention in all this, in our discussions, and the reason why I'm here today is this was a slot for the Urban Transport Group. It was the plan that Jason Prince, who is the director of the Urban Transport Group, would be standing in front of you today to talk about UTG's view of the SME sector. Sadly, for us, he had to go to Portugal to represent the UK operators in the International Trade Association UITP. Portugal, Cheshire, Portugal. So, rather than leaving us completely in the lurch, Jason sent us a short video about the UTG, and you'll see from the slide who they represent, which are the major local authority groups in the country. UTG sent us a short video, and if we can play that video now, I'll be very grateful.
So thank you for the invite, and sorry I cannot be there today, and thank you to Tony, who will attest that I'm a bit of a transport geek, and I especially like buses. So while some of you may wish to forget the brown and orange livery of buses that used to potter around East Manchester, and the bright little gem which used to go around Oldham, uphill and down Dale, I remember those times fondly. And why? Because I've used buses ever since I was a young age, right through to the present day. Used buses to get to school because we didn't have a car and my mum and dad worked. Used buses to help go and get my mum, help my mum go and do the shopping. And my partner uses buses now to get to work, and I use them whether in London or in Leeds or in Manchester. So buses, an integral part of, for me, transport and what transport can offer to local areas. And a really important part of that is a mixed market which includes SMEs. And I think that point was made probably more pronounced when I lived in Cheshire last year, before I recently moved back to Manchester. Should I single out a bus company? Well, I'm going to anyway. D&G buses. I don't know if they're in the audience today, but thank goodness you guys put on the 84X, which ran from Crewe to Nantwich. Because if it wasn't for you, there would have been many a time where we would have got stranded in Crewe due to the rails not running, through the trains not running, and no way to get home. And I think that demonstrates the value of SMEs and what you can bring to local communities. Now, I think SMEs, in what is a changing landscape for buses, have a huge opportunity because you have agility, like most SMEs do. You have local knowledge, black cabin knowledge of your local area, and you're rooted in those local areas. And I know at the minute it may feel a bit challenging with the landscape changing through evolution and what evolution can bring, but I think there's huge opportunities for SMEs. My ask for you, though, however, is to go out and push these opportunities. We all need to champion what bus does, and I think bus has a bright future as we recover from the pandemic. But I also think SMEs have a bright future too. And as we start to see areas thinking of new ways to deliver bus services, all I would say to you as SMEs is be on the front foot and continue to push what value you bring. All those I listed earlier about agility, about knowing your communities, that knowledge, continue to push that and speak to combined authorities and speak to local authorities, because I personally believe having SMEs in a mixed market of transport and bus operations can only be a good thing. So in summary, I'm a big fan of the bus, and I hope that as we move through these new gears of devolution, I can help Tony and help Album try and navigate some of that new landscape. Hopefully I can be with you next year at the conference. I said again, gutted I can't be with you this year, but otherwise have a great conference. Hope you've enjoyed this very short snippet, and I'll be seeing you, Tony, and some of you very soon. All the best.
Thanks for that. It's a useful message which we can build on. UTG sees Album as a partner that they want to work with. That's not a bad thing. They are very influential, and actually I'm very pleased that we're able to open a dialogue with them. And it may very well be, noting that Nottingham is actually a UTG member, it may be of interest if we do something in Nottingham next year, but that's not up to me, that's up to those who are putting together the Nottingham package. I'm going to touch on 3 or 4 little things just to put a marker down on 1 or 2 specific policy issue areas, and then I'll pack up and we'll go on to the next much more competent speaker than me. Bus Service Operators Grant. It directly benefits passengers, we all know that. It's a very efficient way of actually delivering money from central government out to users. It reduces fares, it increases frequencies, it does all the things that we all know about Bus Service Operators Grant. And again, as Alistair mentioned yesterday, it is going to be up for a major review in the very near future. We're expecting a consultation document on it. Both UTG and other local authorities will pitch very hard that BSOG should be devolved to local authorities. We will seek to argue against that. What benefit to passengers will that bring? At the moment, it's a very efficient way of delivering money from the government to bus users. It doesn't go through a filter. It's the same everywhere in the country. At the moment, Manchester has to follow the same national rules, even though it's devolved to them. The idea of every local authority being responsible for BSOG and having different sets of rules as you cross the boundary with your bus would actually be quite tricky, I think. And so we will be arguing that it should still be a nationally structured form of subsidy, but it actually should not. But it obviously will need to change as technology changes. The £2 fares cap in England, again, was mentioned yesterday. Album's position has been it should finish in December 2024, but we fully accept the points that CPT makes, that actually that's likely to be at or about an election, and it's likely to mean that they have to make decisions about it at really very much just having come into power, whichever party wins the election. So maybe 2024 needs to be a little flexed, but what's crucial is an exit strategy. How do we get out of this so that we don't suddenly move from a £2 fare to a £12 fare when we go back to what the fares used to be? We would certainly like to keep the money within the bus sector, and I think we can find some ways of better targeting it towards different groups, whether that's, for example, people moving into the world of work or people in apprenticeships, people who we can actually help directly in a better way. Whatever it is, we think we definitely need to have a clear exit strategy, and that should come to, the £2 fare cap should come to an end at some point. Operating buses is, of course, code for the thing that we all actually know, is we need to be able to find ways of local authorities and bus operators to work together in binding partnerships in some way, so that commitments that are made by both sides are actually going to be fully implemented. One area we are looking at, which again was touched upon yesterday, local authorities have an obligation to assess whether the bus networks in their area meet the social and economic needs of that area. Having made that assessment, which they have to do, they then are under no obligation to do anything about it. And we think there should be an obligation. There should be an obligation that once they've established that there are gaps in the network, if those gaps can't be filled by the commercial operators, then they should step in and do something about delivering services that are socially necessary. It should be part of the whole package of things that's offered. It's not a duty at the moment. Government is always extremely wary of putting extra duties on local authorities, because the deal is you give us a new duty, you give us the money to deliver it. But one way or another, we think that naturally needs to be fixed. Alison yesterday showed a great slide of CPT's positions on a number of issues there: funding, fares cap, long-term plans. Fully support all of those. I think it's fair to say that those are really good objectives for our industry, and Album will not take contrary positions to any of those. Accessible information, I said I was going to run through a few quick things. Accessible information is a challenge. The new regulations were launched last year. I have to say, I found the process of developing those regulations deeply disappointing. I don't think the regulations fully take account of the feasibility, the practicality, the financial affordability of what is being expected of operators. The new grant that's been announced for small operators of under 20 vehicles is a tiny amount of money compared to what's necessary to be able to develop the whole suite of changes that we need to put in. And some of those things we are, I think, not yet sure that there are proper technical solutions. Plus there's the whole question about second-hand vehicles. There's lots of uncertainties. We are in dialogue with the Department for Transport about it. I can't give you any reassurances at the moment, but I can tell you that it is something that's very high on Album's agenda, and it's work in progress. One area that I would like to have more information about, but currently don't, is the Procurement Act 2023. And this probably is the point where everybody's eyes glaze over, because first of all, it's legislation, and second of all, it's got the word procurement in it, and you'll think, oh, what's that all mean? It's an interesting piece of legislation which comes into force in October this year. And it requires local authorities, when they are running procurement exercises, to consider the interests of SMEs when they do that, and that they should make sure that they don't put up unnecessary barriers to SMEs being part of the process. Now, the reason why I said it's a bit tricky is that this is one of those pieces of legislation which has got lots of schedules. Schedule 2, section 37, I think, says you have to cross-reference this to a regulation in the Railways Act of 2013, I think, which put into force the third and fourth pillars of the European Railway Directive. Now, this, you see, I hope you're keeping up here. And that then refers to the reworking of EU Regulation 1370, which is now in force in the UK post-Brexit, but then a different piece of legislation. There are several threads to read through here, because at one point it says passenger transport services by bus are exempt. Yeah, from what? I'm having to work out what it is. Luckily, much cleverer brains than me, who sit in a solicitor's office in Preston at the Backhouse Jones mob, are all over this like a rash. And they promised me that there'll be no difficulty at all in getting some answers about what it actually all means. That's what either he's nodding or he's shaking his head, I can't quite see what. But we do need to get an understanding of what this means. And even if bus services are not covered by this type of procurement, what the government has said about looking after the interests of SMEs when you're doing procurement is a message we can feed back. So at the moment, all I can say is I'm aware of it. I can't give you an answer on it. We will do. Watch the website to find out a bit more about it, because that's virtually the final message, which is we are working on policy positions which we can give you, along with talking points about those policy positions, which we'll put on our website. Some of those will be short videos, and it's not me doing TikTok videos and explaining everything through the medium of contemporary dance, you'll be pleased to know, but it will be short explanations of some key features of what's going on. We will have a communication strategy. We are entirely reliant on members to disseminate some key messages. If you get visits from prospective parliamentary candidates or from ministers, always feel free to give us a shout and say, what are the top 3 things I should be saying here? And we'll happily do that. I hope it wasn't too dull. I'm Tony Depledge, and that's it from me.
Oh, Tony, you've now raised the spectre of you doing TikTok videos in contemporary dance to interpret the Procurement Act. I think that's a definite goer. Just one quick question from me. Have you got a sense from around the country, because obviously you deal right around the country, have you got a sense that there is a massive number of local authorities outside of the big city regions who will be clamouring to set up their own bus companies if this all came to pass?
No, I don't have that sense. I get the sense there may be 1 or 2 who... I mean, there was a time when people said, oh, in the old days we had trams, and fares on trams are very low. So if we brought trams back, wouldn't we have low fares again? One of those sort of, what's it called, post-hoc ergo propter hoc. That's what you and I often discussed in the bar in the evenings. Just because something follows something, it doesn't mean it's actually got a causal link to that previous thing. I'm glad Kathy's not out. Did I get the Latin right? It's about that, isn't it? And I don't get that. And so there are some local authorities who say, gosh, you know, look at Blackpool and Reading and Nottingham and Lothian. They're fantastic businesses, and if we had those, it would be great. And that's right, they are fantastic businesses, but they need to have the right governance, the right structure, the right understanding that it's not Blackburn Corporation Transport, Blackburn Borough Council Transport Department. It's a different animal. I don't think there are many. I do think we have lost an entire generation of local authority politicians who breathed an immense sigh of relief when their transport department was moved out of the council in 1986, because up to that point, if anything went wrong in transport, it was their fault. If there was a strike, it's the chairman of the transport committee's fault, and so on and so on. We've lost that generation. So maybe we have some people who want to do it, but I don't detect a huge interest. But there'll be 1 or 2, I think, and they may want to buy a business in order to be able to do it. But we think that we need to give them the advice which says, just go into this with your eyes open. It's not easy, but it's doable. And if you get it right, like Blackpool and Reading and Nottingham and Lothian and here, they're great businesses.
Yeah, as you said, it's not just about having the desire; it's about having the talent and the skills to be able to pull it off. Anybody got any questions for Tony before he leaves us? No? Excellent. Thank you so much for a very comprehensive presentation. Tony Depledge, ladies and gents.